Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy. We are continuing on with our James Bond retrospective today with the second entry in the franchise, From Russia with Love, which is a 1963 spy film directed once again by Terence Young. And we have an extra person tonight. So introducing Tayte onto it, he's joining us on the James Bond retrospectives tonight. This is going to be a good one. We haven't really talked as a three what our opinions are on this film. And once again, like the first one that we did for Dr. No, if anyone checked that out, it's just an open discussion. We do have a plan. We do have sections that we're going to go through. But this week's discussion. We did two this week. It's going to go to weekly after this one. I'm going to pass over to George in a second with the schedule for the rest of them. But it was a really fun discussion last time, and I'm sure this one will be exactly the same.
Yeah, it's really nice to talk about Bond knowing that it is going to come out this time. I think that's the big thing. We know it's going to come out this time, so we're not getting tricked anymore. But whilst we're building up to that new film, of course, No Time to Die, September 30th, if you guys in the UK, we'll bring the schedule. As we said, we're going back to weekly from next week. We couldn't start this during Oscar week, just pandemonium, too much Marvel and Oscar stuff. We thought we'll start it this week, do 2 on week one rather than 2 on the final week. And we're just going to quickly bring up the schedule for you guys at home. So obviously next up, we're going to have Goldfinger, which is going to be very fun to talk about. And I might as well really quickly, whilst we're going through those, it's every Tuesday, I'm just going to quickly bring this up to hype up those posters again. We've got obviously a schedule taking us right through till the release of No Time to Die. We'll be, of course, wrapping up with Spectre at some point in September. So don't need to read the dates out because it's basically every Tuesday from now until then. There should be a day of the week called it. I don't know. Is there a T in a Bond term we can do for something Tuesdays? We'll have to think of something, but we want to hear from you guys. So comment all your thoughts, obviously, on your favorite Bonds, your memories watching Bond. We're still new to the series. We'll bring them up on the video. And, of course, your thoughts on From Russia with Love, your memories with X10. I'm going to come to you very quickly in a moment. Something's been very topical this week, actually, for something going on behind the scenes. But before we get to that, we're in our socials where you want to find us for other videos. Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and we have a link to the TeePublic store in the description below, which has a Bond t-shirt on as well. So maybe there'll be some more over the next couple of months. But it's been very topical because there's been a lot of PS2 discussions on Messenger this week. A lot of people. And Tayte, you before we went live, you mentioned to me you have a lot of memories with this film. So we always do like a first time watching this. For the Bond films. There'll be so many where it's not that big a thing. Like, oh, it was on the box set. However, I want to hear about you and the PS2.
Yes. So I didn't have many games on my PS2 when I was playing it back in my childhood. But I played the games to death. One of them was Lord of the Rings game, which I'm sure the Return of the King one, which I'm sure Chris will go. Yeah, it's one that you just played to death. Another one which I played to death was From Russia with Love. I fell in love with the story that came with this game. It follows very closely to the film. It does change a few things, but just kind of playing with my mates over on the multiplayer that they had on that game and just kind of playing through the campaign over and over again, it kind of stuck with me. So this film in particular, which was already one of my kind of favorites from the Connery era, kind of stands out a little bit more to me and has a little bit more meaning because it was kind of part of my childhood growing up on that kind of sense of things, which is a bit weird to talk about. Not many films here have that impact. I know Goldfinger obviously had probably the most famous Bond game and would have had a larger impact with people growing up with that game on the, I want to say that was on the 64, was that on the GameCube?
GoldenEye, Tayte.
GoldenEye, sorry, wrong one. Yeah, I know that there are some things that stick with you from other media that cross over into film, but this one for me was PS2 From Russia with Love game.
Well, I'm going to pass over to George in a second because you've made a cracking purchase this week, my friend. So you've got many hours of game time ahead of you. This is going to be very brief for me, as it's going to be for most of the Bond films. I've watched this film once before tonight, so I've seen it in a total of 2 times now. And this was just whenever, I think it's when Spectre came out and we initially had this idea to do these retrospectives. I was just watching through all the Bond films. I do actually remember this being one of my favorites, though, certainly of the Connery era. I don't know if it still holds that high regard now. We'll get into it in the review. But the game, I only saw bits of it. I don't know how closely it follows the film because I know there's a segment where James Bond has a jetpack and he's flying around what I think looks like Big Ben shooting at a helicopter. I might be wrong. And there was no jetpack in this. 0 stars for this movie. No jetpack. I know they had $2 million budget. There's no excuse. But that's basically it, really. This was a film that I watched and I still haven't played the game.
I've not played the game yet. I obviously everyone's moaning, crying. You can't get PS5 stock, and I was very fortunate to get one in November. And I'm clearly enjoying the PS5 so much. I've gone and bought a PS2 this week. So I've ordered a lot of games. A lot of them have arrived. There's a couple more pending. I'm reliving some of my childhood. I've got Nightfire in order at the moment, and there's a couple more. But Chris, we spoke on. I'm not going to disrupt it from last video. I spoke about World's Not Enough. I've done my digging. And I have my PS1 copy of The World Is Not Enough. Everything that introduced me to James Bond. So I did about to get that out of the garage, and then he reminded me I need to get the memory card for it, which pissed me off because I've got to go crawling to find it now. But no, from Rush of Love, I think this was like the third or fourth time I've seen it. I'm not the biggest fan of this. What I will say is that this is one of the nicest posters by far. Just the draw and the art on it. Love the poster. Not the biggest fan of the film, not to put it on a downer right away, but we might as well kick off talking about the plot because this is going to be an interesting one. I don't have IMDb up. Me and Chris had a very interesting conversation earlier where I don't mean to put you on the spot horribly. You mentioned how confusing this is, and I kind of like read it out loud to you on Messenger, and it was so stupid, like reciting the plot. And I'm just going to go over. This is what my theory is, and if it's wrong, if people disagree, it's fine. But so Spectre want revenge for killing Dr. No, which is fine. We're going to get into all this properly. Spectre want revenge for Dr. No. Okay, I get that. That's fine. So their ultimate plan is to use a spy as bait because they know everything about James Bond. They're going to use there's like new technology or probably something mesmerizing back then. That's this humongous big deal that the UK needs. So, of course, they will send James Bond in to sort of sleep with the spy, get the stuff, and then boom, they can go kill him on this big strategy done by a world chess champion. I was like, okay, very interesting. So you don't get Bond until 20 minutes in, so we've seen the villain side of things, and then it cuts to MI6, and they're like, well, we know it's a trap, but we're just going to go along with it because, we actually want the thing still. So there you go, Bond, go and do it. And that's basically the film. It reminds me, every time I think about it, it reminds me of Revenge of the Sith, when it's Anakin and everyone just sat in the elevator like, it's a trap. And they're like, yeah, spring it. I thought this was very strange looking back. It's got one of the best Bond scenes, I think, in all of them. But this film is just a lull. And I don't know if that's me being ageist against it, but there's so much better out there.
Yeah, so like this is according to IMDb. I mean, you're not wrong. It was a very meandering plot, it felt like, and I don't know if I'm just getting old, like in my old age, like I'm just not comprehending smart brain think movies anymore. But it's always the case. Sorry, with spy movies is that they tend to always be very. There's double crosses, triple crosses, and yes, convoluted. Thank you. And this was the case with this film because I sent you a voice message, George, as I was watching it, going. So they want to send an assassin to take out James Bond. Fine with that part. I get that part. That's not the problem. But then there's a Lecter, which is like this encryption device that they need. But Spectre also kind of want it. And then there's a agent who's defecting to the West, but she's actually a double agent. And then I was like, just make it nice and simple for me. Make it nice and simple for me who can't comprehend these films. But IMDb says James Bond willingly falls into an assassination plot involving a naive Russian beauty in order to retrieve a Soviet encryption device that was stolen by Spectre. So it was stolen by Spectre, but Spectre also still want the device because James Bond stole it. It's a mess. It's a little bit of a mess.
They want the device, but they also want to lure James Bond into a trap so that they can kill him. So they want basically... Yeah, they want two things from the film, and I really enjoy this film. I'm going to be in a slightly opposite camp to George in that one. I really enjoy the fact that this is a kind of back-to-basics spy thriller. Mm. This isn't a spy action film, which a lot of the films kind of leaning more heavily on the action sequences. This was all about crosses, double crosses. It's about the technology. It's about actual spy work. It does, I think, a better job of laying the groundwork, which would then kind of be extended upon in the later kind of Connery films that kind of allow us to kind of enjoy the Bond films nowadays. But I just really enjoy kind of the convolutedness of this film. I actually enjoy the intricacies of the kind of geopolitical kind of landscape they set in this film.
I think for me, the one thing that I was hit by this movie was it's a very slow burn film. And the more I think about it, I do really like this film. I think it is easily one of the strongest Connery ones. I don't think, obviously, it's not as good as Goldfinger, and I'm going to have to rewatch some of the other ones. I know it's definitely not as good as, it's much better than Diamonds Are Forever, which is one of the worst. Jesus Christ, when we get to that film. But there's a lot of elements that I do like about this film. The pacing isn't great. I will say that for a film that clocks in just under 2 hours, it feels so much longer than 2 hours. And maybe that's down to the case of how I had to watch this film was completely all over the place. Like, work was crazy, so I had to watch this film over 3 nights. Well, not 3 nights, but 3 viewings to get to the end of this film. So maybe that adds to the reason why it feels a lot longer than it does. But to me, the film doesn't really sort of hit its stride until the final act. It's a very strong final act. I think that the whole train sequence, which I'm sure is a scene that everyone always brings up as one of the best. The choreographed fight scene on that train, and then some of the scenes that you get after that involving the helicopter and the speedboat. That's the stuff that, when I think about this film, that's the stuff that I remember the most. A lot of the rest of the film is very, very slow, but I do agree with you, Tayte. I do like the back to basics approach, and I think that probably out of all the James Bond films, it is one of the ones that feels the most spy-ish, like spy movie-ish in terms of its plot and all the events of it. And we were also talking before we went live saying that this doesn't feel like a sort of, a world-ending Bond movie. He's not going to stop any sort of like nuclear launch codes that are going to destroy the world or anything like that. It is I was going to say it's a very simple premise. We've established that it isn't. It is very convoluted, but I don't know. In terms of its genre that it's based on, this one feels the most sort of, James Bond is that gentleman spy character.
Yeah, it's an interesting one with Bond himself in this because, it's in a really weird placement, right? Not because it's the second film. Dr. No is the first Bond film, and everyone knows that, and that is its reputation, the first Bond film. No one really talks about the other stuff. It's the first one. And then Goldfinger is the one where the Bond formula was done, but Goldfinger is the best one, whatever one you want to put there. And because From Russia with Love's in that sandwich between them, it's in a really weird place. So I'm not saying people forget about it, but because it's pre-Goldfinger, but not the first one, it's in a very weird lull. And I think even sort of contextually going back to like 60 in the release, this is right in the height of the Cold War. You've had the Cuban Missile Crisis and stuff like that. So obviously it's going to be a film where it's, in 1963, a film called From Russia with Love would be massive for people to watch, for people to think about like, oh, the Russians have infiltrated it and stuff. And that's why I think it's a very interesting one. Now, the spy stuff I absolutely see. I think obviously, the more these films get, and especially Goldfinger onwards, once they get that, A, B, C, D, E, F, G sort of written down, we know how it's going to go. The spy stuff very much takes a back seat. And I think if you look at the history of Bond across all almost 60 years now, every Bond's first couple of films are always way more serious, or always way more sort of spy focal, if you can even call that a thing. And then eventually they descend into the chaos, which means they need to recast Bond. It's that very interesting history with it. And I think it's just strange, this one. I think there is some really good stuff, but I'm just not bowled over by it, because that's unfair, but I just don't think one that's ever really hit me in that way. But I really want to play that PS2 game because I know that Sean Connery came back for it as well. But yeah, I don't know if I'm in a minority because I know a lot of people. I think like even my granddad, who's like a massive Bond fan, this is his favorite one. It always has been. So you do get people that are like that with these films.
I think the difference is a lot of the Bond films do come in with a massive opening sequence, and they come in with massive kind of it's all big at the very, very start. Even with Dr. No in kind of a sense, you do have stuff happening which you can kind of latch onto and go, okay, this is going to be key elements of the film. This film starts very unusually. I think probably the preamble before the kind of opening credits is, I'd say, one of the worst, maybe. It's one that doesn't really introduce much into the film. For those who have seen it and just want a bit of a reminder, it's basically Spectre agents fighting in a maze and taking out a fake James Bond. And that is the entire sequence. It's very short. There isn't really much context to it. And then it goes into kind of the opening sequence, which they don't even use the Matt Monro song for. They use a different theme in itself. So for people who kind of have watched through all of the Bonds and then possibly going back to this film, it might be quite jarring because it's so very different from all of the others from the start. And like you said, it is a slow burn film all the way through. And then all of the actions in the end, all the actions in the third act. And I think they kind of did that to build up the tension of the film, to build up kind of the idea of who's crossing who's the real villain here, or who's gonna how they're gonna get out of this situation as the stakes are getting higher and higher and higher, and then it boils over. But it's very different to other Bond films, which are usually structured with action sequence, long spy element, action sequence in the middle, long spy element, action sequence at the end. So structurally wise, it is very different, and maybe that's why it doesn't kind of translate on rewatch for some people.
Well, I actually think this was a precursor to a lot of the stuff that we would see in future Bond films, because I was just doing some reading, and the editor of the film and the director, it was their decision to move the training scene where he goes after the fake Bond, the opening scene of the film.
Yeah,
I think that was going to take place much later in the film, probably, I guess, more close to the train sequence, so you have more of a connective tissue to that part. But they decided to move it and have that be the pre-title sequence, which, say what you want, it's not a great opening title sequence, I suppose, but it did set the stage for what would be the pre-title sequence James Bond scene. This film did a lot of things like that. You have the intro, the actual intro of the film, the opening credit scene, had the back projection of the dancing women, which I don't think was in the previous Bond film. I think that was I think they switched the title editor guy out for this movie, or he didn't want to return for it, so they got the guy in, and he just did it as like a stylistic thing, but that would become the style of what you expect from the Bond opening. I'm trying to think of some other things as well. You also have like the ending action scenes of the film as well, where the main plot finishes, but then it continues on for like a little action stint at the end. And it did say, now I don't think this is true of the Daniel Craig ones, it might be true of all of them leading up to that point, that there was a helicopter sequence in each of the Bond films since this film. Now I don't know if that's true, but that's what I read. But there's, off the top of my head, there might be some that don't involve one.
I think, oh god, that's an incredible.
We'll have to wait and see.
I was going to say,
are you saying helicopters specifically, or are we?
I guess just some kind of helicopter scene, whether it be an action scene.
I think that's right. I think that is probably correct, because even in Die Another Day, they have someone parachute down to the Buckingham Palace. So
because I was trying to remember Casino, and I couldn't remember a
Casino Royale didn't.
Casino Royale.
I think that could be true. I'm going to go into every film now on a helicopter run. I think there's helicopters.
I'm trying to think. For Your Eyes Only, maybe. Where's that? We'll have a look at that.
Yeah, that's incredible. While we are researching, because you mentioned a lot of the things this sort of not necessarily sets up, but things that would go on to be bigger things. I think Spectre's got to be worth mentioning, because they were a passing one-liner. We got the spelling out of Spectre, which I won't be saying again. I just love the fact it ends of extortion still. We get the first sort of instance of this is the supervillain club in You're All Numbers Not Named, and we've got the introduction to Blofeld and his cat, and we never see the face. And I'm not saying it was intentional. I mean, I hate. One of the things I despise about Marvel is how well they've done all that shit, because now we look back so many years later, like, oh look, this was setting up sequels. It's like, it was never uncommon pre-2008. It just became another level after Iron Man onwards. And you look back at these, and the Spectre stuff was, I hate using the word planned, but it was a natural build-up that they wanted to have this recurring villain. They wouldn't show his face, they'd show the can. I love that over the Connery films we get this amazing Spectre subplot, because they kind of crop up a little bit with some of the others, or I know that the Craig ones have tried out a lot to have it all tie in together, and I don't think it worked as well as it should have, or even needed to, in truth. And whereas this feels right, that sort of 60s cinema vibe, that pompous over the top action Gerardo, and there's the evil man stroking the cat that's the mastermind behind it. I absolutely adore that these films do that, and this is the perfect setup. You get 2 scenes with Blofeld, and a really creepy scene with fish killing each other. Which is still a bit weird to watch today. I don't know if it's just me that finds the fish scene strange, but there's not really a definitive villain in this film. I mean, one of the big things, I think when we hit Goldfinger onwards, we'll know exactly what it is, but it's, you go into like, we're going to get the villain, we're going to get the henchman, we're going to get X, Y, Z, we're going to get the car, we're going to get this, we're going to get that. That wasn't really a thing here. And as you said, Chris, this teases some of it. And we'll get to Q later on, but we got, I guess, our first kind of big henchman who feels like the main villain, but we know he's not, because he sort of, dies like 30 minutes before the end.
Sorry, I've found out there is one film that does not have a helicopter in it, and that is Man with the Golden Gun.
Yes, sorry. Really cool. I meant to say it said everyone except Man with the Golden Gun. It did say that I read. That's fair enough. Yeah,
there we go.
We needed Nick doing a parachute jump.
Yeah, like you said, this film does focus a lot more on kind of a lot more members of Spectre, and it does kind of focus a lot on the side villains of the film, with kind of the overhead of Blofeld just kind of sitting in the background. We still haven't kind of seen his face at this point. We still don't really know who he is. We just know he's kind of the top dog and kind of running the show. And that leaves us to some very interesting characters that we see along the way. I can't remember the name of the character itself. I'll have to bring her up, but I find her completely intriguing with her knife that she has in the boot.
Oh yeah, I'm trying to find the character name as
Rosa
well.
Rosa Klebb.
Mm-hmm.
I think her character is so menacing, and yet at the same time, she isn't really given much screen time for it. I feel like given maybe an extra film on top of this, could have really built her up as one of those big kind of Bond villains and stuff like that. But you've also got Grant, who kind of in the film, Bond doesn't know which side he's on. He thinks he's on their side, but he's actually the double agent. We kind of know that from the opening sequence where we see him. And it's an interesting film, villains, because none of them feel too big. Whereas every single film, you look at every single other Bond film, you've got big villains. Even in the first film, Dr. No, it's a big name villain that comes in. With this film, it's very scattered. But each henchman kind of has their thing to do, which kind of ties it all together in the end.
Yeah, I think that Bond's strength is when you do have like a really memorable, I won't say comic booky villain, but the name, as you mentioned, Dr. No or Jaws or Goldfinger, like, you know, you want a big villain like that. And I think that Bond's strength is when you do have a memorable villain like that. That being said, I do like the concept of this film where you've got sort of multiple agents all going after Bond at the same time. And I actually do think the villains are great in this film. You know, you mentioned Grant, like the fight on the train. We'll talk about that later. We already have a comment earlier mentioning the train scene from Ezzy. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. The fight on the train was classic. So in terms of like hand-to-hand fighting, absolutely. And oh God, you mentioned her name, Rosa Klebb, did you say? I think it was.
Rosa Klebb, yeah.
I love her character. She is incredible. She's threatening. She's got a really, this sounds weird, she's got a really intriguing face, like just her presence on screen, like she is memorable as a villain, I would say. And, you know, I guess sort of we live in a post Austin Powers world. I knew that Austin Powers was based on James Bond, but watching him stroke the cat at the beginning was just, I was just cracking up thinking about Austin Powers. It's interesting actually because Blofeld isn't actually credited as Blofeld. I think in the end credits, it's got like a question mark in the end credits. Anthony Dawson played him, I guess sort of like in person played him. He actually was in Dr. No as Professor Dent. I don't remember his character, I must admit, so I don't know how major he was in that, but I remember the name.
He was the guy that got when he went into the room to shoot Bond on the bed.
Oh, okay.
Him.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
A lot of the 60s Bond films, they bring back a lot of the same actors in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just the studio system in truth, them using it to their advantage back in the 60s. But yeah, it was really weird because I think there's been like, I don't know if anyone's ever played Blofeld twice, not including Christopher Waltz. I need to check that as well because there's always like, aha, new appearance, aha, new this. And it's so hard post Austin Powers as well.
Is it 4 actors or is it 5 actors playing Blofeld now?
Jesus, I mean, it depends how you count them. Like, if you count this guy, you know, and then you've got like the voice who dubbed him, and then because the main one, and then
facial on-screen appearances, it's now up to 4.
Yeah,
but then
I guess we'll count along as we go through the rest of the podcast. I know there's a lot. Suffice to say, there's a lot of them, absolutely. But no, and I think that, you know, we talk about that. I think that this film was a step closer to that formula. It introduced a whole host of other things to the formula. Even which I guess Marvel adopted, the James Bond will return in Goldfinger in the credits, which you know, I think that's been a staple now as the films have gone on. So it did introduce a lot, but it doesn't feel completely refined. It feels like it's getting closer. I think we keep saying that Goldfinger was that one that just completely nailed the formula in every single way, and which is the one that they've adopted as they've gone through. As a villain thing, though, just to sum up, I'm glad that they did do Spectre. I know that when we talked about Dr. No, Spectre wasn't introduced in the books until Thunderball. Now, I don't know how, you know, if the books do follow in sequence, that Thunderball is the 4th book in the franchise. I'm not sure. But I know that Spectre didn't get introduced till much later in the books. So they must have seen that, brought that forward, knowing that they wanted to lead to this sort of like bigger villain aspect towards it. But it's a nice carryover as well. You know, we always keep talking about the Bond films are very much a you can just come into them cold, and you don't really need all the baggage of all the other movies. If you haven't seen them before, you can still pick it up and just get swept up in the new adventure. But you do have some carryovers, especially with this film. I think certainly the earlier Bond films have more of a continuity between them before, as they get further on. You have the love interest, Sylvia Trench, carrying over from Dr. No into this one for a short scene. And yeah, obviously, like, the death of Dr. No is kind of the preamble to why the villains are wanting to do what they do in this film.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've never read the books, but I know that the one thing saying is the order of the films is not correlated at all between anything. I think if you bring them up, it's insane. I think everyone knew Casino Royale was the first one, but I feel as if like Live and Let Die and Moonraker are like straight after one another, and it's really strange that the films would kind of dip into what they thought would work. I'd actually want to bring that series up. One day I'll read them, a long time away from now. I do know the last one they did do was Octopussy though, which was one of probably the latter Bond films that ever got that adaptation as well. But I'm going to quickly bring up Easy E. I'm assuming it's NWA based pronunciation of the name. I appreciate that. What I want to quickly bring up, we've spoken about the villains. We haven't really spoke about Bond. I guess maybe now's a good time to bring up Sean Connery. This is one of his better performances as Bond. I think there's been a clear trajectory across many years where you watch Thunderball and you can see he's starting to slowly chime in, and you get to Yearn twice and he's sat there saying, I can't wait to stop playing James Bond. I think he's great in this one. I think Dr. No was a great introduction. They were still sort of figuring things out, and I think this one and Goldfinger's when Connery is like nailed the essence of the character, and he has essentially become one with James Bond. And I think you look at sort of the iconic images as well. It's the suit and everything. So I think Connery is great in this. I think he's the best thing about this film as well by a country mile. And I think like many Bond performances, obviously they're not just carrying the film because of namesake, but they are the more interesting thing about it, and you get the additional stuff which is cool. But Connery is that in this.
There's a debate in here for whether it's his best acted performance as Bond. I don't think it's his best performance as the Bond character, but it might be his best acted film, if that makes sense. Like, because obviously you've got to act for the Bond character, and then there's just standard just acting out a scene. I think in this film he absolutely gets those suave notes, the one-liners here. I know Chris will be talking about those later. But I think we're discussing this beforehand. Like, he just feels so gentlemanly, and maybe that's because this isn't a very action-y film until the very end. He's given more time to kind of go into his character and go into kind of the intricacies of his spy work and how Bond is meant to be portrayed. And that might be influenced by the fact that it is the second film and it's an extension onto the first film. First film introduced the character. This film extends upon that, and he's given so much kind of room to be able to develop that character, which is kind of, I'd say, almost finally developed in Goldfinger, where it kind of becomes fully formed. But with this film, I think, once again, with the groundwork, it felt like another groundwork piece that just kind of developed throughout the entire film. I think his acting in this was incredible.
It's difficult for me to talk about sort of his performance out of the character as a whole of his tenure as Bond, because it has been so long since I've seen those other ones. So I guess a lot of my review in terms of his performance will have to be done in retrospect when we get to his final Bond film. I think he's great in this. Like I mentioned last week, I guess, Tate, we can ask you this question as well. Yeah. This is going to be sort of our question that we ask. Who is your favorite Bond? Is it Connery?
In the other room, I have a framed photo of Sean Connery, so that will give you your answer there.
yeah. And I mean, he is James Bond. I mentioned that last week, and he's still great in this one. He was given a considerable bonus for this film. I know this. I think he had a 54,000 salary with a bonus of 100,000 on top of that. So he was paid a fair bit. You talk about him sort of tuning out of the role. He best be enthusiastic about that role if you're getting paid that much money for it. But fair play to him. He gets stuck in with the stunt work as well. Like, I think the fight on the train was pretty much just those two actors as you see them. No stunt guys involved in that. So, and he just looks the part, doesn't he? I will say that I like the elements that they bring into the character. And I guess this is another thing as well. I talked about all the elements they bring into this film that carry over into the next ones. The gadgets. We get more about the gadgets in this film, and it's just great to see Connery, getting to grips with those. I think this is a thing that they introduce in all of them, where a gadget is introduced at the beginning of the film before he goes on his mission, and then at some point that's going to get introduced, and he's going to get out of a situation. This, you have the briefcase and the knife, and I think he has the gun as well, doesn't he? So he has 3 in this film. And yeah, it just makes it work. As I say, I'm going to have to wait until I see all the other ones, but I like how they sort of dialed up that spy angle with him a lot more in this. And he's just tremendous, whether it's the voice, not the voiceover, sorry, the one-liners, or I love his interplay with Moneypenny as well. We didn't really talk about it all that much, and they only really get one scene together usually in all of the films. But I love the scene where he sits on the desk and he's like cozying up to her and going like, "Oh, come on, Moneypenny, you're the only woman for me." And I love that stuff. I love the banter with him. He's great.
Yeah, I think it's when you start getting into. I know it feels really strange because you don't get much. It's like a weird family. Like once you get to the MI6, it's like, oh look, there's M. Oh look, there's Moneypenny, and it's the little hat being thrown onto the thing I always liked. I'm glad not everyone tried to copy it, but
I wonder how many takes it took him for the hat throw.
I don't think it's that hard. I honestly, like in this film more than the others, he is very close to it. It's probably I don't think it was too hard for him to do, and I can imagine Sean Connery probably couldn't be asked to try it more than a couple of times in case. But I do like that stuff coming together, and I love with Desmond Llewyn. You know, we always hype up like Robert Downey Jr. It's like people played these characters for X amount of time. This is somebody that played a character for 36 years. I don't even know how many films there would have been. Probably from film 2 to film number 1920 or something. Like I don't know what number was on Nuffers, but 36 years playing that same character. It was always a small role, but whenever Desmond Llewyn pops on the screen for these Bond films, it's kind of like, because we've done the Marvels, it's kind of like the Stanley cameo. It's very different to that, but it's what you expect from these films, that you always know he's going to be in it, and it's that lovely little moment like, yeah, we've got Desmond Llewyn in. So I love the fact we get the intro, and I think the scene that I love with all of that stuff is when he's explaining all these gadgets and everything, and M's just sat there just like smoking a pipe, like he doesn't have the faintest idea what on earth they're talking about. It's such a minor moment, but it's just the editing just to put in there for like a second. I just love it. I don't know why. It's something that always makes me laugh.
Something that always connected with me with kind of the introduction of Q and the introduction of almost the entire team being there and stuff like that was that it became a team effort. It wasn't just a one-man army going after the world and kind of stopping things. There is a team behind him, and in pretty much every single film, he does rely on one of the gadgets from Q to get him out of a situation, and to kind of he relies on something, and it's nice that you have that in there. And I think Q is such an important character to the entire series going ahead from this point on, that it kind of makes you think, because on rewatch I thought, oh yeah, Q will be in the first film, we'll see Q and stuff like that. He wasn't there. I was like, when's he getting his gadget? When's he going to be getting this stuff? And it just didn't happen. It was like, okay, we'll have to wait for From Russian with Love. But yeah, no, the gadgets that they come up with, I'm sure there's one person with the later films who has to come up with the ideas for these gadgets and stuff like that. I'm sure it's quite a fun job to do that. Obviously, they had the source material of the books to go with on this one. But is it called the attache case? Is that what it's called in this film?
I believe so, yeah. I just call it briefcase.
Just the multi-tool briefcase that is able to wound a man in 5 or 6 different ways or kill them is just something that you need in Bond films. You need that kind of, oh, it's spy gear. Oh, it's that kind of, it's something that looks normal but very much isn't, that I love so much about Bond films.
Yeah, and I mean, Q was introduced in the previous film, actually. I don't think he was called Q, though. I think I'm just checking on here. It was Major Boothroyd, I think was his name, played by Peter Burton. Scheduling conflicts apparently meant he couldn't come back, although he did appear in Thunderball as an RAF officer. So he did come back in the film somehow. But I think, Desmond Llewyn, he is Q to me. Like, I think, does John Cleese play him later on down the line as like his understudy or something? Yeah. I mean, I love John Cleese. I haven't seen, as I mentioned, I haven't seen those films, so I don't know how he is. I don't know how he is as Q, but Desmond Llewyn is great. Yeah,
Paddington.
But Desmond Llewyn's great, and as I mentioned, like it is another element where he was from 1963 to 1999. Jesus Christ, I mean that's dedication to a role. He's great as Q as well, and I love the banter that he has with James Bond. We need to talk about another. Oh, sorry, do you have a? I think George, you were going to say something
really quickly with Q. One thing I always say about the Bond films: whatever gadgets he has becomes real tech in real life, like eventually at some point. And it's more obvious. It's more noticeable with the Brosnan ones because I feel like there's a smartwatch, which is well, everyone has now, and I love these old films. Like this is the because I think Bond, it's not just these films; it's like a look back at history. That's how I've always seen them. Like that's what the world was like at that time, context of villains, organizations, how the world is, and every time Q pops up, it's like, what gadget are you going to say this week that we could have got in the 90s or something? And not to say I absolutely love it. And it's just amazing that I bet you've got these like smart people that probably like watch the Bond films. It's like an Elon Musk, as bad as he is. It's like, I bet he'd try and design some bonkers technology like Jurassic Park if he could. And it's just saying like, who's going to eventually make it, just as a really irrelevant side piece.
No, absolutely. I think should we talk about the Bond girl now? Is this another?
Yeah.
This is another section. I actually really like the Bond girl in this one. So Daniela Bianchi, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, plays Tatiana Romanova. However you say her surname. This is the second Bond girl in a row to be dubbed. Although I will say it doesn't appear as noticeable as Ursula Andress from Doctor No. She was actually uncredited. She was dubbed by. Let me just see the name here. Barbara Jefford did the voice. I think she's a great Bond girl. I like the element. There seems to be more to her than Ursula Andress, who was literally just there to look good, which is usually one of the monikers of a Bond girl. But I think this character just had more to do in the plot. Now, don't get me wrong. It ain't no Vesper. It ain't no Eva Green by the time we get to Casino Royale, but she has more to do with the plot in that she is the person that Bond's sort of like ultimately going after, that she's defecting and she's a double agent, and there's more intrigue with her there, I guess. And, the question as to whether she's going to double cross Bond, and, there's the final standoff at the end where, she comes in and ultimately saves Bond at the end. So I feel like there's a lot more for her to do in this. Now, don't get me wrong. She still just gets slapped around in the film. And, all those 1960s sensibilities that you get in the film, but I don't know. I quite like a character in this one, I've got to admit.
Yeah, I like that you've got someone that's more in a leading role that isn't just this support sort of pop up for 2 minutes, have a joke, sleep with her, and go. I know that just become a thing, and it's very much accustomed to Bond, but I thought that she's plot-centric, that we do get more from her, because I like just find the first Erstrand just as not really much as a character, but if you have that, you want to rebalance it with someone that's actually involved in the plot. And I think it's meant to be. I mean, I always used to joke when I was doing something. This film could be called The Spy Who Loved Me, because it does obviously get to that terrain eventually. Whether The Spy Who Loved Me was always a joke on this title, I don't know. But I always imagine that she is the love part of the From Russia with Love. So you kind of know she's got a bigger role, but I just quite like her character. I didn't realize she was dubbed though. I should have done more research, but it's not surprising. The amount of people that got dubbed in these films is insane, and the biggest one's coming in the next one, which if you don't know, it's going to shock everyone.
Yeah. I also had no idea that she was dubbed, and that may have completely ruined that for me.
They did a good job then, I guess. So,
Yeah.
Ursula Andress was pretty evident that she was, but yeah, no, it shocked me as well.
I was going to say, the actress from this film, she hasn't really done anything else at all, really. She did a few other projects, but nothing major.
She's mostly a
big.
model, I think. Was she like a Miss World or something, I think? I know she was like a ballet, or she studied ballet, I think, for a while. So I don't know if she's more of a dancer / model than an actress, but she was decent.
Yeah,
yes.
I'm just going to echo the comments you guys said. It was nice to see a Bond girl that actually had something to do, a little bit more than just kind of sitting there looking pretty and not really having any relevance on the plot at all. She was the essential part of the plot, really, and that kind of it made for better viewing, if that makes sense. Like, it's nice to see someone do something and not be just kind of an idol on a pedestal and just there to kind of have the glitz and glamour. To actually have her as a key part and a key element to the film, and even the final kind of conflict, she is really at the center of it. And that was kind of not progressive from Bond, because you've still got the kind of, like Chris said, the 1960s sentiment of kind of the violence against women, but at the same time, it is a baby step in the right direction in that sense for later Bond films.
We have a comment from Easy E. Say your name correctly this time. She was in Operation Kid Brother. I have never heard of Operation Kid Brother until now, I must admit. Do tell us more about that. I've just clicked to see if I could find it. I can't find that anywhere, but do tell us more about that, because I haven't seen that. Maybe that's a film, again, to add to the proverbial list that I'll get round to at some point. But shall we talk about, I guess should we move on to like favorite scenes now? Because I don't know if we're all going to pick the same scene. For me, it's the train sequence. It's pretty evident, isn't it? When we get towards that final act where we're on the train, that's where you can see the money on screen, essentially. The first James Bond film, it was done on a budget of $1 million. It was very sort of basics approach to that film to get it as looking as good as it did in that film. They had to sort of like pull out all the tricks of the trade, really. This one, you could tell, the first one was a success. Here you go, have double the budget. And you can see it on screen, especially when you get towards those action scenes. I think even in terms of the direction as well, just the way the camera moves around, the way that they cover certain scenes, it just feels a lot more, I want to say a lot more professional, but it just looks a lot more engaging, I guess, as a film than Dr. No did visually, I think. But the train sequence is just tremendous. I was reading about as I mentioned, like Connery and I don't know the guy who plays the character of Grant, but they pretty much did all of their own stunts. It was choreographed by a boxer at Cambridge University, but just the way that it's shot as well. And a lot of these older films, I want to bring up a comment later, actually, that Easy mentioned about the rear projection. I'll bring it up now, actually. I liked rear projection better than all this wall-to-wall CGI that goes on currently. There is a charm to that rear projection, especially when you've got like the final shot of the film where they're in the boat and you can clearly tell they're not there. But that to me is just so synonymous with older films, like 50s or before and 60s movies, that I quite like that aesthetic to it. But this fight scene felt way ahead of its time. Like, I could see a fight scene similar to this in like a new film, maybe with improved sound effects or whatnot, or a soundtrack behind it. But I think the fact that it doesn't have any music behind it just really adds to sort of like how visceral and realistic the fight scene is. The way it's shot, the way it's edited, the low lighting as well, I think really adds to that sense of danger in the scene. I think it's a tremendous sequence. And, I haven't seen all of the Bond films, granted, but even remembering back to all those years ago when I was watching them when Spectre was coming out, this was one of the scenes that stuck out in my mind as like a really memorable sequence in all the films. I think it still holds up today in terms of an action scene.
Yeah, I think with ones like this as well, we always speak about it's great when you see scenes where it's just actors working with one another, like it's just two people alone in a scene in a room. And when you have the whole train carriage sequence, the build up to the fight itself, I love. And it's so petty when it's that like, come on, chap, like, I will show you the escape route. Like, when it's like, let's go like uber British to make it as obvious like I wasn't this like informant spy type character. And I love the build up to it. I like the fact they're trying to one up each other, and it goes right back to the roots. The whole point of Q is you see the device, so at the end it has a payoff. If you don't have a payoff to the tricks, then it's either subvert expectations on purpose or it's you're going to be this big moment. And it's when he's like, oh, I can give you 50 coins. And that's when you know, okay, now it's going to get interesting. I love the fight. I love the whole sequence, the build up to it. I think this is one of the best scenes in all the Connery films. It is probably one of the best Bond scenes. And I think it's so easy for people to like turn their nose up at the older films because the action's done differently or it's not elaborate, it's not expensive. But I think because we just have them talking with one another, sussing each other out, working out how each other's going to go about it, I think that's why the scene works so well. If they just had to punch him up on a train, it's just like you're a kind of boring henchman, but at least there was something to him by getting to know him even so slightly.
I'd say starting off with kind of the fight with words and kind of the wordplay that they use with each other and that kind of the tension that's built up, like you said, it feels very nervous in that scene. You don't know what's going to happen. You obviously know about the briefcase, so that's kind of in the back of your mind, but you're still wondering, okay, so how's this going to play out? And you're kind of sitting on the edge of your seat. And then, like I said earlier, with the action scenes towards the end, it just boils over. And I think, I agree with you. It is one of the best Connery sequences, possibly one of the best sequences in Bond. The tight, confined spaces. It's not a fight where you're going to see like Bond punch through or shoot up of like loads of villains and have Wilhelm screens in the background and stuff like that. It's very tight. It's very confined. It feels like just going forwards in time a lot. The later Bond films would have had some influence over this fight scene because of how fight scenes have evolved in cinema. I think this kind of, with a bit more kind of modern brutality, could easily be a Bourne scene. Like, that's how it feels like. It's so claustrophobic and it's so intense on kind of the hand-to-hand combat and stuff like that. It's so well choreographed. I'm going to check. I don't know if you guys have already checked or not, whether there was any stunt doubles or whether they did just absolutely just go for it on this scene.
I'm not sure on the whole fight. I think it said that they did the majority of them all themselves. So I don't know if it was the entire fight, but I know it was a fair majority of the fight was done by the actors.
But either way, it's just so fantastically shot and performed It's a very clear standout from the film. I do like the helicopter chase sequence afterwards, but that might be the game kind of creeping an influence, because I remember that being notoriously difficult thing to complete during the game. So that maybe kind of stuck in my mind a little bit more as well. But no, the train sequence is an absolutely fantastic sequence that should be celebrated across all of Bond.
Definitely. I want to talk more about the helicopter sequence in just a second. I just want to bring up Easy's comments here, confirming what Operation Kid Brother is. Apparently, it was a spoof with Neil Connery, who is Sean's younger brother, Adolfo Celli, and some others from the Bond films. I have never heard of that, so I'm definitely going to be checking that out. I will say that we are just going to stick to the Bond films for this. We're not going to be doing any of the spoof films, because Lord knows there's been quite a lot of James Bond spoof films, not even counting Austin Powers, like the actual Bond films, one of them starring... Actually, was the Sean Connery one, Never Say Never, was that a spoof movie, or was that just like a straight...
It's a kind of spoof / remake of Thunderball. The fact it's called Never Say Never Again is probably the bigger way, but I know Casino Royale is more of a spoof, the 67 one, obviously not the Daniel Craig one, with the David Niven one. So it is interesting seeing sort of Bond's legacy. And I mean, when you really think of it, if there's only really been 3 carbon copy parallel spoofs, been Austin Powers, Never Say Never Again, and Casino Royale, I'm surprised there aren't more. But obviously, you know, what this one did do is lead the way for other spy films. I think, namely Kingsman and Bourne are probably the 2 biggest things this first.
Oh yeah,
well,
the
was that around before?
Was a TV show, wasn't it?
That was. Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, that was. I think that was the 50s.
Because there were a lot of copycats, as we mentioned. Well, actually, no, I guess this was a copycat on that. I don't know, but the spy genre was big during, like, you know, the old time production. You mentioned the helicopter flight scene, actually. So I was doing a bit of reading about the production. Apparently, this film was like so down to the wire in getting a release, because this went over budget, over schedule, all the pitfalls that a film could run into. Apparently during I think it was actually filming the speedboat chase, actually, towards the end, the helicopter that the director was in crashed in the water, actually, and sank. I think there were a bunch of crew on there as well. Got out of there and then went back to directing later that day because they were so behind schedule. And the Bond girl as well, I forgot her name now. Was it Daniela Bianchi was in a car crash. Her driver fell asleep on her commute to set, and it set them back weeks until all the facial scarring healed. It sounds absolutely bonkers. So fair play to them for getting the movie out there eventually and getting it looking as good as it did. I think the helicopter sequence was added quite late in the game because I think it was to larp off the success of North by Northwest. It is a very similar sequence, you know, with the crop duster flying very low towards the main character. I do think towards the end, though, I was running out of steam a little bit because it felt like I just was waiting for the film to end. You know, you get an action scene with the helicopter and you think, oh, okay, that's the big action climax. We've done the train sequence. We've done the helicopter scene. And then you get a speedboat scene. And then it goes on to the next scene. And I was just like, just end the film. Just cut one of these action sequences out there. And I think actually the helicopter and speedboat chase were added late in the game to have some kind of action climax. I think it would have been interesting if you'd have just left it at the train sequence, because I think that that's still good enough as a finale to a film. But, you know, if they wanted to go bigger and better, then they clearly did that. But I was kind of running out of steam towards the end in terms of the pacing. I'm not going to lie.
The problem with this film, and I don't know if it's mainly me, but every time I watch it, you get to the train sequence, like brilliant. And then it's like, oh, there's still like 25, 30 minutes after. And it's like, it's the fact it's a speedboat, it's the fact there's a helicopter and there's this, and it's kind of, they're like, you've detracted away from a really good scene. And maybe it was something to do with audience, they wanted the big explosion, that they think people would want the explosion. You know, nowadays, you know, the general audience aren't with it enough to, not being horrible, they want a big action set piece into a Bond film. They'll moan if there's a quiet dialogue scene with it, with a couple of fist bumps there and there. So I understand that was probably the same reaction back then, but it feels like such an afterthought that they probably had a definitive ending. It's like, oh no, we now need to add all of this stuff in. And you know, it's weird because I think when you have that pre-Goldfinger, I know there's only 2 of them, this is probably the best chance they had to get away from having the big over-the-top ending. Because obviously now it's a custom and we expect it. And even at the top end, if you look at all the more recent Bond films over the last sort of couple of decades, the one of the quietest ending is Skyfall. It's just in a mansion in Scotland in the middle of nowhere, and there's something to be said that less is more. And I think this one missed it just.
it does tack on a little bit too much towards the end. I think the boat chase, I don't hold it as highly regarded as the kind of helicopter scene before it and the train sequence before it, possibly because there have been better boat chase scenes across the series, and when seeing that up against the others, it's quite difficult to kind of relate in that same way. But then you've got the extra end sequence of Rosa Klepp coming back, and obviously the decision at the end of the film. So yeah, I do agree with you guys there that it does kind of lean on a little bit too much, and they maybe could have got away with a little bit of a quieter ending, especially because this film was a more spy-based film. It wasn't based around that action. It spent so much time building up with all of that kind of spy intrigue. Then they go with the action sequences because it's getting towards the end, and then they could have just nicely tapered it off again with maybe a spy kind of based ending and stuff like that. Maybe knowing that there's going to be a sequel or it's going to continue on with the James Bond will return thing, they could have led it on. They could have kind of gone, oh, here's some new bit of information. It'll lead on to the next film and stuff like that. But yeah, it is how it is. We were left with what the film was. And as much as I do love the sequences individually, I think put together, it does seem like quite a lot towards the end.
Yeah, I think, and you mentioned like the Klebb scene as well at the very end, and I do like that sequence, and I like that it gets tied up, but that felt like something that could be saved for the intro to the next movie. Like, I thought the final Klebb scene of the film was going to be where he's like, you two fucked up, like, we don't tolerate failure, and then she kills Grant with the knife, and he's like, you're now the new number 2, and she's like, I won't fail you again. End it, and that's like your final scene of Spectre, and then lead it into the next movie. But you know, even thinking about it, and as I mentioned, like the structure, you always do have the climax, and then you do get like a whole other segment. Even Casino Royale did that, and because I think that was one of the first Bond films that I saw, and I don't want to jump too far ahead to that film. When Le Chiffre's killed, I thought, well, that's it. The movie's over. Like, he's the main villain. But then you have so much more that goes on past that with Vesper and the guy he goes after at the end. So, again, I don't know if I can be too hard on the pacing. I do think the pacing of this film is very slow. And I guess if this is going to sort of take me on to final thoughts, there's a lot that I do like about this film. I think the film definitely sort of hits its stride when it gets towards the end. Actually, I haven't talked about the music. Before we get on to final thoughts, we need to talk about the music because we have John Barry introduced into this with the soundtrack. And we kind of hinted at this last week where, you know, he didn't do the main theme, but when he came on board, by God, you remember that soundtrack. Yeah, we've even forgot the Bond song. Jesus Christ, I'm getting ahead of myself. I love the soundtrack to this film, and it goes way beyond like the James Bond theme. There's I quite like the romance theme, I guess you would call it. I don't know what the specific track is on the soundtrack, but it tends to play when he's around Bianca's character. No. Is her name Bianca? What's the name? The Bond girl. When he's around the Bond girl in this.
Tatiana Romanova.
There we go. Thank you. I was looking at the actress, wasn't I? I love that theme. The escape sequence where there's like all the hundreds of rats and they're trying to get out of the building. I love the soundtrack there as well. And I was actually conscious about it. I was thinking, the soundtrack's really good, especially for like 60s as well. You know, a lot of those older films have a very sort of oldie feel to the soundtracks. It doesn't feel as sort of like epic or grandiose as most modern soundtracks do. But it did in these certain scenes, and I really appreciated that. And the Bond theme itself, it's like a tentative Bond theme. I think it is counted as one, you know, from Russia with Love. I think it's Matt Monro, was it?
Matt Monro, yeah.
It's a great song. It doesn't sort of fall into that classic Bond theme that you come to expect, and I think that's just down to the fact that this film's followed up by Goldfinger, which is easily one of the best Bond themes, and I think that, you know, Shirley Bassey by far overshadows anything that, you know, came before. And I think that in terms of the theme, it was still trying to find its footing. It wasn't like a prominent main intro theme song like an orchestral version's played. I think you hear the song on the radio at some point in the film, and then you get the song in like full statement at the very end over the credits in the final scene. So it doesn't quite hit the mark as a Bond theme, but as a song, I think it works well. And I guess it is like a title track to go with the film itself.
Yeah, I quite like the main Bond theme. The soundtrack's okay. It's one of them weird ones where, you know, when it's like, here's a character we like, and every time he walks in the room, we'll play his theme. Very old school cinema. I think when he goes to the hotel with the bugged wires and like they're just playing the normal Bond theme, I was like, it's not a big deal that he's gone into the hotel room, but I don't mind it because I know a lot of the older films are like that. But I really like the song, and it is weird because it's played on the radio like 20 minutes in for a couple of seconds, and then we get it at the end of the film. It's it's what you said. They're finding their footing still. They're not quite there yet. The formula's not in, and obviously Goldfinger onwards, we know we get the pre-credit sequence, the title song with the titles, and the rest is history. And it's that weird territory where it's like the pre-Goldfinger films. And I'm not saying had this been made tomorrow it'd be different, but yes, it would have.
I'm not sure. I'm trying to debate in my head whether the theme song, the actual theme song sung by Matt Monro, would have worked at the start of the film in the starting sequence, because it is a quite slow-paced song, which kind of goes along with the slow-paced start to the film. But that in contrast, I do love the actual theme for the film that is played in the title sequence at the start, and that is kind of revised throughout. I know we're trying to discuss it beforehand. It is a kind of sped up, slightly altered version of the Bond theme, but the kind of composition of it, I really do like as far as a theme that kind of comes throughout the entire film. And the music in this film does stand out a lot more than Dr. No. I think in Dr. No, they didn't know whether to go with songs or whether to go with theme, and they kind of went with a mixture of using both. With this film, they kind of stuck a little bit more towards the themes, and they did have the song inserted into the radio, but that kind of fitted into the fact that there was a radio there. Maybe it would have been a different song because they wouldn't be listening to there's a little bit of meta stuff in there, whether in universe, whether it's the song be on the radio and stuff like that, but whatever. When the kind of song comes on at the end of the film, it is a good song. It's just whether it would work if it was at the start or not, is what I'm asking.
I'm sure someone's done an edit on YouTube where they put the song over the title sequence. I'm sure that exists out there. I need to talk about the one-liners. My God, I was jumping the gun when I was going to take it on to final. There are two standout one-liners in this film for me.
Do we have one-liner in the comments?
We do. I'm going to try and quickly find it here. I'm not going to do an impression. You won't be needing this, old man. That's a great moment. I do like that one-liner. But I have two that I've narrowed it down to. I like the last one where I keep forgetting the name of her. Who's the henchwoman at the end who with the knife on she? Where she dies and he's like, yes, she's had her kicks. That's a really bad one. That's a really bad one. But my favorite one, which I genuinely thought was a great one-liner, this is almost like in the paragon of your Arnold Schwarzenegger's and your Sylvester Stallone's one-liners. It's where the guy's rappelling out of the mouth and the guy snipes the guy and he falls off and he's like, yes, she should have kept her mouth shut. I really liked that one. That one got a laugh out of me. I was like, okay, that's top tier. That's top tier one-liner right there. So I need to remember what some are from Goldfinger. So I'm looking forward to that more from film to film, really. I'm sure there's a lot more in that film.
You've got a few in there.
I'm sure there's a lot more.
Roger Moore's the king of the one-liners.
Yeah, undoubtedly. Yeah, that's where it gets stupid. And I'm here for every minute of it. I can't wait to get to them films again. Because I never did watch all of his films. I think I needed to see Octopussy and View to a Kill for the last two. So I never even finished his whole filmography as Bond. So I'm looking forward to that. I guess we can sort of get on to final thoughts on this film. I did actually want to read a couple of reviews. It's only a few sentences from when the reviews came out at the time. Because by the looks of it, this is a film that, as the years have gone on, has completely changed, people's perceptions and is actually regarded as probably one of the best Bond films now by a lot of critics. When it first came out, this was written in The Guardian, quote, didn't seem quite so lively, quite so fresh, or quite so rhythmically fast-moving. Now, that's interesting when we've watched this now and we talked about the pacing, and I was like, yeah, it is very slow-paced until the final sequence. And then he went on to say, quote, the film is highly immoral in every imaginable way. It is neither uplifting, instructive, nor life-enhancing. Neither is it great filmmaking, but it sure is fun. I don't know if I go as far as that. That seems a little bit harsh, that final statement there. But I did want to bring that up because I thought that was interesting that even back then people were talking about the pacing of the film. In, especially like a 60s film, we regard films from back then to naturally be a lot slower than probably they are today, like a modern Bond film, unless you get to Spectre, in which case that was always very slow. But yeah, this seems to be a film that, is now being given critical, praise and everything like that. I guess like my final thoughts on the film was I didn't enjoy it as much a second time round as I remember doing the first time that I watched it. I don't know if it was because it was all fresh the first time I watched it, but I do like a lot of elements about this film. I love the spy angle to it. I like that we get more of those aspects to Bond that we come to expect now and demand from the franchise, the gadgets, the title sequence, and it's getting close to being refined. It's not completely there. The train sequence, as I mentioned, is easily one of the best action scenes in all of, the Bond filmography. And I like the plot. I like the more basic plot in terms of it, trying to keep it is still meandering. It is still quite confusing to me, but I like that it is through and through a spy movie. It's not completely grandiose or ridiculously over the top. It is quite a self-contained, smaller Bond film, I guess. I do like that about it. So it's not perfect. I did find it quite a slog to get through some scenes, and it takes a while to get to the exciting parts where it really does pick up. But I think it's a solid entry in the Bond franchise. I think whether it's better than Dr. No is a discussion for another time when we come to do our ranking, because there's elements to both that I like. I think this is better filmmaking than Dr. No, probably down to the fact that they had double the budget. But it's that iconic status of Dr. No, isn't it, that we mentioned last week in terms of certain scenes from it. So yeah, no, I enjoy From Russia with Love, though, for what it's worth.
Yeah, I think solid is the word you said, which has been in my mind for a while, that I don't dislike enough about this to sit here and rant and say this, that, and the other, and I don't love enough about it to say this is beautiful, this is stunning, this is this. I think the train scene is by a country mile the best thing in the film, and I'd put it above Dr. No, just in terms of pre-Goldfinger. It is that one versus, but I think it's a well-made film, better than it is a Bond film. But the only reason you can say that is because after this film, the Bond films became their own genre. At this point in time, 1963, it's a spy film, it's a book adaptation. It wasn't quite the big James Bond and grandiose subject we know it as now. So I think that's a really important thing. But I think it's well made. It's personal preference. It's not one I ever go back and rewatch, in truth, unless it's a marathon. It's not one that I've got to jump around and be like, everyone, you must watch this film. This is really good. Everyone go watch this. It's one of those weird ones. It's in that weird terrain. I think it's well made. It's just I don't enjoy it as much as the others, which is for other reasons, I guess I could say. But we'll find this out probably on the Goldfinger video.
I agree with you, George. It is in a weird state because I would say, yes, it is actually one of my favorite Bond films. I do quite like it a lot. But upon rewatch, I enjoyed it as much as I did kind of the first time watching it through, and I have that nostalgia that comes with it with playing the game. But at the same time, if I wanted to go back and watch it, I would give it a long while before I went back to it, maybe with another kind of rewatch through the entire series. I love the slow-paced burn of it at the start. I do like the action sequences to the end. I do agree with you guys that it does kind of get a little bit convoluted, and it does get a little bit stacked up towards the end as well. It is in that weird kind of tier because obviously you've got the big one next. I know that a lot of critics cite this as one of the best Bond films, but I'd say a lot of Bond fans would cite the next film as the best Bond film. So you're almost in a little kind of mini golden era of Bond here, where it's starting to gather pace and starting to get better and better with each film. But for me, at least, it is a solid pick. It's a fantastic spy thriller. I wouldn't say it was the best Bond film in that sense, but I do think it is a very good film as far as the filmmaking is concerned and everything else that's involved in it.
Absolutely, and as Easy says, no commando assault on the Megalomaniac headquarters. Maybe that would have made it a better movie. Who knows? We will never know.
No, I think that would have detracted from the film because then it would fall into the generic category. And this one's very set aside from that. It's lower stakes. It doesn't have kind of the same starting sequence as all the other films, and it still kind of maintains that Bondness to it. So. Mm-hmm.
Well, we'll get to the territory where it starts to go off the deep end. I don't know how very soon, but it's coming. It's coming in the next few weeks, definitely. But no, that'll do it for our review on From Russia with Love. So now we want to hand over to you guys. So Easy, I want to say thank you for tuning in tonight. You discovered our video through this one. Obviously, now we will be live every single day for a James Bond review. But we want to hear from you guys. If you didn't catch the live stream tonight, let us know your thoughts on From Russia with Love. How do you think it stacks up against all the other Bond films? Do you prefer it to Dr. No? Anything regarding James Bond, really. This is kind of like a celebration of Bond, really, this retrospective we're doing. It's going to be good fun as we get into it. And, of course, we're going to be back on Tuesday with the big one, which will be Goldfinger. That's going to be Tuesday, the 4th of May at 8 p.m. We're going to try and go live at 8 p.m. for every single one of these. This was a really fun discussion tonight, and I'm sure Goldfinger will be as well. Plenty more to say, so Easy, please do feel free to tune into those as well. I'm trying to think if we have anything else coming out on the channel. I know that on Sunday, me and you have something planned, George, which isn't Bond related. We do some other stuff on the channel that isn't always James Bond related.
Yeah, May the 4th is Star Wars Day, and we've made Goldfinger our sacrificial lamb, so we won't be celebrating Star Wars. No, I can't complain this time. We're going to be going live on the channel this Sunday. I should have brought the thumbnail up for I'm calling it a casual drink along to the original Star Wars Clone Wars series. It's now on Disney Plus. It's under some vintage collection tab, the 2D one, the Tarkovsky one, whatever you want to call it. We're watching volumes 1 and 2 combined. I think it's 2 hours 20. We're just going to be chilling and drinking, no rules, no nothing like that. Just a Star Wars watch along for something we've not visited in a very long time. So that's good fun. If you like Star Wars, do join in for that. But things are a bit of a lull. There's new releases. Without Remorse came out today on Amazon Prime, which I don't think anyone in the world knew was getting released. One of the worst marketing campaigns of Amazon, hand in hand with what was the other one? Coming to America too. Terrible company for marketing films. I'm just going to get that there on the Bond video, not while Amazon are watching. That being said, we're moving to cinemas soon. They'll be open soon. We've got videos planned for that, building up to that, some other things. So when we've got details, we will of course share them. And the best way in which we'll share them is on our social medias, which is Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy, letterboxd.com/Cinema Savvy, and we of course have that link to TeePublic in the description below. But I think that is everything I need to plug. It's not, thank God I'm not saying Falcon and the Winter Soldier, Marvel this, Marvel that, Oscars this, Oscars that. It's nice. It's just at the moment Bond on a Tuesday.
Yeah, we know where we stand. It's a breath of fresh air, actually. It feels like we've got space to move around now. It was pretty packed, wasn't it, the schedule beforehand? But this has been a blast. Really looking forward to the next one. So thank you for everyone that tuned in and watched, and we'll see you on the next video. Take care, everyone.